Hello YouTube viewers, welcome to my channel Science to Technology. In today's show, Rocket Monday, we're going to talk about Buran Energia. So let's dive right into it. Basically a poor copy of Space Shuttle. So why exactly this puppy was made? You have to understand the mindset of USSR. They were very fearful and they were very paranoid of the USA. Now, was there any actual reason for that paranoia? Well, yes, because they studied Space Shuttle and the idea was like it does not make sense. And this is before Space Shuttle was fully built and actually used. This was like when they announced it that we're gonna develop Space Shuttle. Now, why was that? Well, reality was they had their own analyst and go through the numbers, and the reality was it's going to be too expensive. Meaning, flat out, they understood that what NASA was claiming that it's going to cost us this much money was too low. They were like, dude, no matter what you do, you cannot, deliver a space shuttle in this kind of cost. That's not going to happen. And that turned out to be true. So it's not like they were idiot. They figured it out, and their fear from this was that this is a military project that they are sliding under civilian project. So that kind of scared them. And in terms of capability, what this puppy can actually do was too high if they have actually delivered it, meaning the space shuttle that we actually got, the actual puppy that is we are using, it cannot do even 10% of what was claimed by NASA. It's like, before the Congress, they are like, it's going to launch like, 2 times a month. No, 2 times a year. So it's going to be cheap. It was hyper expensive. Like if they have actually delivered it, it would have been too overpowered, meaning it would have been built ISS like this. Done, go home. Like this was pitched as bus to space. And that's a very horrifying thing because they understood that this puppy can easily carry huge satellite to low Earth orbit and use that satellite. Once that satellite is depleted, because let's say it's a very heavy satellite, but it's very low to the ground, so it does good surveillance and all that jazz, it's going to run out of propellant very soon. This is like, I'm going to refuel you and I'm going to collect you, I'm going to bring it back, and then I'm going to upgrade the equipment, sensor bay and all that jazz, do any maintenance if it's needed, then launch it again. That idea was very scary. And again, NASA was pitching that this puppy can launch satellite. There are actual satellite in orbit at this point in time that was designed for this, as in like they have docking clamps that can clamp onto a robotic arm of this and all that jazz, but it was never utilized. Not too many satellite because again, did not launch that many time, but reality was it was too overpowered if delivered to the specification that NASA was claiming. And now they're paranoia. Like fear kind of made sense. Like it's a technology, it could unlock some new things. Like they were even thinking like, what if this has actual laser weapon systems and all that jazz. But it would the paranoia part was like, this will make perfect space weapon platform to boom USSR. And this point I'm like, dude, like I get it why Putin is like so paranoid, and it's like they're like, this can be launched and we'll not detect it. It's like, have you seen a space shuttle launch? It takes time to open the vehicle building, to come to the launch pad, to launch. Like you have more than enough time to detect it and react accordingly. So it's one of those things. Is like, I'm gonna come directly from your front gate. It's like that was just stupid. It's like if they're saying like this could drop nukes from space. Okay, makes sense, tangible. This will be undefended. Like this will be the worst thing for it. It's like you can see it. Who's launching it? Where there's launch, you can see it. It's not like underground bunker opens up. It's not that. It's like slow launch. You can detect it, trajectory calculation it, and just like boom it if you need to. So that was the paranoid part. Fear part I kind of get it, but like paranoid part, that was the like, this is the perfect space weapon. It's not. It's the worst. So that's why like they freaked out. In their freak out, they figured out how to copy it. Now, why did they decided to copy it? Well, reality was very simple. Making this sort of craft takes a lot of R&D, and if they wanted to start that R&D from scratch, it will take too many years. They wanted a response now, again because of the paranoid part. So they took as much data possible from NASA, because simply NASA was open to public, so information was widely available. However, that itself was like more than good enough. But after that, they also had a lot of university systems to gain under development technology, meaning the technology that will be used and would have been made available to public in few years. They just like kind of backdoor to it. So they took a lot of data out of it. Unfortunately, they hated it simply because that they ran the calculations on themselves, like figured it out, is the math correct and all that. Is they figured out no matter what they had to make the shape. If they started everything from scratch, they still would have landed on the same shape, because aerodynamics kind of limits you what you can actually do. So the reality was, dude, they had to do this shape. And it really pissed them off, because again, what engineer, what designer would be like, yeah, my object should look exactly like yours? Nobody would want that. They also did not wanted it, but they were like, aerodynamics cannot be cheated, so we had to do it. That's why it looks exact, dicto. Now, that is the outer shape, outer chassis and all that, just a rough idea of that. But after that, they're like, okay, let's throw everything else away. So they changed everything other than that. That's why the booster looks so different. That's why the behind side of the shuttle looks so different. Copy is just the aerodynamic structure. That's where they saved the R&D money, where it's like, okay, we figured out how the aerodynamics works. Let's just control C, control V it, and then just rebuild a rocket part, which they were actually good at. So that was the idea of the copying it. So Energia was created. Now Energia was basically a booster that acted as an independent rocket launch system, meaning this was a powerful puppy and it can go to, well, orbit, whole orbit. And it could be a carrier for the space shuttle or a heavy lift launch vehicle. How heavy? Well, they were targeting around 100 tons to low Earth orbit. So big boy, big powerful boys. And how the heck it achieved that kind of power? Well, reality is it had all the engines. Compared to space shuttle, space shuttle has three main engines on the shuttle itself, because USA's calculation was that engines are the most expensive part. Let's salvage the engine. Everything else we can rebuild very easily, but the engines are expensive part. So let's shave the engine. Here it was like, that does not make sense. Let's just throw away, make disposable engine, exactly how we were doing. Benefit of that is that this puppy, basically without the shuttle, is still a capable, useful rocket. And they're like, that was the Energia. Energia literally was ready before the shuttle was. So they launched it with this puppy, basically this black payload. And be mindful, if they actually wanted to do this, they could have used this as a moon rocket, because it was very capable rocket. And by this time they had figured out N1 project was scrapped and cancelled, because, well, it just had a habit of going boom rather than actually going somewhere. So idea was that 4 strap-on liquid booster, and it may look like all of the strap-on booster has 4 engines, but all it is just one engine with 4 chambers, basically with 4 nozzle, RD-170. Now it was using kerosene and liquid oxygen, exactly like a majority of our Russian system works, and it was very powerful. That's why it has like that kind of oomph. And core stage had 4 RD-0120 liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen engines. Now this was much cheaper than RS-25 engines. However, you have to understand, RS-25 engine is almost like God tier technology. Why is that? Well, the reason why it was designed to run on hydrogen rather than like any other propellant was very simple. They wanted to make it reusable. Back in that day, as in like 1970s, and making it reusable, they were actually successful. The engines are rated for 50 reuse, not 1 or 2, 50 reuse design life. To give you a context, the only reusable engine that is comparable to that is Merlin, and Merlin was only rated for 10. Only recently Merlin has been upgraded after years of use. Now they are reaching a point where that like 12 or 13 reuse is possible. So RD-25 was really ahead of its time. This was much cheaper. Why? Because use and throw. And it was the coast stage. This is gonna do the final velocity dump. Boosters is just gonna take you. Boosters were gonna act like more of like stage 1. Of course, the core was still working, but stage 1 was this. You're gonna stage it and then directly go to orbit. So Energia was completely independent rocket, meaning they could put payload on the side like exactly like this, and they can do parallel missions. This was ready before shuttle was, so they were like, we can do heavy launch mission if we need to. So that was the booster part, completely independent rocket system. Then we come to the Buran part, and Buran had no engine. Benefit, it had more payload capacity, meaning the payload was like, numbers are not exact, but roughly from 25 of American to 30 of their design. So numbers are not very precise, but you get that point. Like it had tangibly more space and capacity, simply because it did not have rocket engines. What you see is thruster engines. Basically, you see that 2 tiny engines, that are the 2 tiny engines. Now, they had bit high dreams. Basically, they were a bit high on the weed. They were dreaming to make this into a plane. Basically, they wanted to put jet engines and fly it. Now, why? Well, from a technical point of view, it does make sense. Imagine if you had this and the payload is heavy. How the heck are you going to carry the payload? What if this itself had jet engine? Of course, it won't be very efficient, but if it can carry from point A to point B or like a very small distance, that's more than good enough. So instead of building this, the idea was this itself will be self-carrying. They tried with 2 engines. That's why you will see some footage of 2 engines. It did not work out, did not enough oomph. And then they decided it will take 4 of that. But then why did not launch with 4? Well, they figured out during re-entries, protecting all these 4 was very impossible, and it was taking too much basically space, payload capacity from the main shuttle. So they were like, okay, let's just throw the engine part away. They had like very big dreams. The idea was like, at least at the worst case scenario, the engines will have enough oomph when they are landing. They can do abort landing, meaning if they're like weather situation is like this runway is compromised, go to someone else. They could do that. Best case scenario, this will act like a very inefficient but at least a capable plane where they can like carry small satellites at least. I'm really doubtful if they were actually planning to carry 30 tons on it. Like those jet engines have to act like a rocket engines at that point in time, because again, wing is not big enough to create lift, useful lift, so to say. So that idea was scrapped very early on. Now this puppy was launched on 15 November 1988. Now that's kind of amazing, simply because this was first built, like as a first spacecraft built completely autonomously, meaning you do not need humans in it. Meaning if there was a scenario which they were like, hey, what if we have near a space station and we just like, have some issue, somebody has to go to rescue the people, this puppy can directly go and you do not have to put another person in jeopardy. That was very desirable. And like, think of this way, like a space shuttle is an issue, you send another space shuttle and both of them get trapped, you can afford to lose space shuttles, you can't afford to lose astronauts. So that's why this autonomous spacecraft was a very ahead of its time kind of technology, and it was well working technology. It was not like just put something together. No, it was actually good and working. Even on the first landing, it had some issue and it had to do calculations to land it, because crosswind was much ahead of what they were expecting, but it did its job properly. So it was surprisingly ahead of its time in terms of autonomous. Space shuttle did become autonomous, but it was during almost end of life. So 15 November 1988 was uncrewed launch flight, and it did exactly as it's supposed to. Basically, everything was fine and awesome, and they developed an Antonov AN-225 Maria basically as a transport craft, because that jet engine idea was scrapped very early on. Unfortunately, the exact article that actually flew, the like mission ready article, was destroyed in 2002. Now, problem with this is that the hangar, because like once Russia was a corruption in Russia, and this project was like they were not even maintaining it. Like roof actually had a crack. If they sealed the crack in the very early days, water would not have penetrated inside the roof structure, and on top of this structure, it would have saved it. But because water was unchecked for a very long time, it corroded too much, and then the people actually went on 2002 to repair the roof. It was too late by that time, and the roof collapsed. Bam, destroyed everything. So there is no physical history left anymore. And there was like before this roof collapse, there was some plans of revival, restoration, simply because when NASA figured out that space shuttle is just not good enough because of the solid booster and inherent flaws. Like for example, they did figure it out. Buran was like, hey, let's not put foam near it, so foam can fall and crash into it. That was a very wise decision. Does not have solid booster. That was also a wise decision. So all those things were like really good. So there was some hope that instead of retiring space shuttle, let's just switch into this. But Russia was like, nah, this is too expensive. And not to mention, after that destruction at 2002, they were like, yeah, it can't really be restored. So that happened to Buran. So what is faith of this sort of magical technology? Well, reality is you have to understand, whenever a project is created, you have to understand what is the foundation of that project. Majority of the time, fear and paranoia is never a good base, because paranoia over exaggerates your dangers. Like for example, they feared like, what if USA had put something like 25 ton? If they wanted to carry something that is 25 ton, they had to be damn sure that they have more capacity in that. So that was also another reason why they wanted to like really move the engines to this puppy. And that's never a good thing. It's like ask Putin right now. That's really not a good thing. But paranoia never yields logical goals. So that created an issue. Now, while they identified a lot of problems with Shuttle, they fixed some of them. But overall, their situation answer was not that much better. Meaning, more and more people are now saying that no matter what you do, shuttle design itself is not good. Meaning this idea of having something parallel to each other and then launching almost single stage to orbit, because this puppy keeps firing from basically on ground to orbit, says inherently single stage to orbit, is like really not viable, because all you are just doing this throwing away 8 good liquid rocket engines is not cheap. You cannot just like eat 8 rocket engines. It's not cheap. So it does not make sense. And while, yeah, it is true SRBs are expensive, but it's not expensive for NASA simply because it's ICBM tech, meaning the companies that are forging the ICBMs, they are like, okay, I'll just place some extra order for you. So it's not that expensive. And Energia, like the score booster, which they launched, like that black rocket was actually launched. It malfunctioned because of the self-correction booster of this black one. Booster worked properly. Is the black one, when they launched it, they wanted to correct it. The correction backfired. It overcorrected and then spun out of control. So that was tragedy. But that was just SLS. Basically, what SLS is trying to do, they wanted to do back that day. Consequence was both of those projects were over expensive. It was not simple, even though they had all of the R&D of USA. They had a very better what you call starting base. They could have made tangibly better technology, but because of the paranoia, they wanted too much out of it. And given the fact that embarrassment of N1 rocket, they wanted too much out of the booster. So booster was like hyper complicated. Like, think of this, like it has 4 strap on to it. 4, not 2, 4. That's a lot. And they did not design in such a way that you can put something on top of it. Because if you did that, this will become actually a really good SLS replacement. But reality is it's too overpriced. The whole system was too overpriced. That's why even though by the time Russia was created, they had no use for this. They were flat out. It was a weapons project that disguised itself as a civilian project, but there was no use for it. And because the booster was too overcomplicated to be cost effective, shuttle was not neither here or there. So it's like, that's why it's like this project is one of those scenarios where it's like, if you're copying someone's bad homework, you're gonna make bad homework. That's why like you're using a rocket that is older than this, still in use. So faith of this rocket was really, really bad. And I really don't get it. It's like, why the heck people saying that this is better than space shuttle? Like, I do get it. Engineering has a saying: you build it first, you build it better. That's the only two options. If you are the first, awesome. Nobody is going to criticize you for being the first. If you are after that, you have to do better than that. This did not do that much better. Yeah, it did not at foam, but not much better than that. So this was my presentation on a poor copy of Space Shuttle. Hopefully you have liked it, learned from it. In that case, please give the like button, share it amongst your friends. That will help me a lot. If you didn't like it, didn't enjoy it, I urge you to press dislike. Press it twice to show me extra disappointment. Please leave a comment because I do try to reply to all of them. Subscribe, press the bell icon if you're free. And as always, thanks for watching.